Hey, Jock. I figured we'd probably just start at the beginning of the book. I've got to figure that out better. Just playing around with a couple things while waiting for people to show up. I have not the complete fiction tome. I have I have the complete Cthulhu Mythos Tales. So I don't know if that's the same one you got, unless it's the one you got from Barnes and Nobles. Then it is probably the same one you got. There we go. Hey, Derp. Yep, we're going to do some Lovecraft tonight. Why isn't this working? I asked it to work and it's not working. There we go. Trying things just a little differently tonight, so just let me know what you think. Oh yeah, no, this is I think this is something else. It's all pretty and it's got the gold edges and all that stuff. Some tasty tea I made myself. It's going to be fun because there's words in here I'm definitely going to stumble over. It's funny because I can always read them in my head, but you're really trying to say them. Yeah. Yeah, mine's specifically H.P. Lovecraft's stuff as opposed to... Well, I've read through these. There's a number of them I have to... I haven't decided how I'm going to edit them. Because there's one or two words that, even though I'm green, I probably shouldn't be saying, Okay. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm well aware. It's an issue with the time the pieces were written. It's not my fault they used that language back then. Are you sure you're still sub robust? I mean, everybody should check and make sure they're still subbed, because I know that's an issue that happens. Hold on, guys. I think I may do something slightly different. Well, I mean, he had those thoughts, but he kind of came around in later life when he came to the realization that maybe some of those thoughts were a little incorrect. Well, you got to sub, you got to ring the bell, and then there's like another notification, another thing that you have to turn on so that you don't get just certain notifications. I don't know. It's fucked up. Okay, there that is. All right. Hold on a second. Okay. I know I'm on the screen twice. I'm just trying to fix something. Twinsies! Okay. I guess I'm going to have to do this the other way, because I was hoping I'd be able to do it in such a way that I could still use the thing that lets me highlight the other chat. But unfortunately not. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do that. Hello, Alex. But no, it's not going to let me do that. But at least I can still see both chats, so that's good. Or technically all three chats. No, there's only going to be one on one of me. In the meantime. That's going to be interesting. How am I going to get rid of that? So I'm troubleshooting partly now, partly because I plan to use this for the Halloween stream. So I'm trying to get it set up But part of the problem I'm having is if I bring this up, which is from my outside source, I can hear myself. I bet you hear me twice. But if I turn that off, you can only hear me once, but I can't. Like if I just want, how do I just make that the full screen? Ah, there we go. That might work, except for the voice is a little off, I think. All right, but can you still hear me? The Halloween stream, it's going to be a 12-hour stream. I'm going to have some guests on. Sheep's going to be on with me. I'm going to do part of it in costume. Part of it is the avatar. Play some games, maybe give out a prize or two, that kind of thing. All right, so you can still hear me. You can see me. Other than I feel like it's a little delayed. It's probably going to work okay. It's not like the mouth tracking is really close anyway. Oh, great. Now it's hugging up a little. All right, we'll just worry about that in a minute. Okay. Just fumble with this a little bit more, work on it a little more tomorrow night, because I will be using this to stream Baldur's Gate. But for now, oh shit. No, there we go. All right, there we go. That's what I wanted. Who wants to hear the story of Dagon? There is squid in the chat. I don't think I can do custom emojis, but I think there is an octopus or something that frickin' YouTube has, yeah? I still need another 1,500 watch hours, I think. So if you have a spare time, a spare computer, a spare phone, not doing anything, go ahead and throw up my one of my playlists. I'll tell you right now, they last quite a while. No, not me runes. It's a different thing. Yep, 1,457.5. I'm almost halfway there. Getting closer. Thank you for all your help, Sleazy. I really appreciate you. The Daedra. We're not talking about the Daedra. We're talking about the Eldritch. All right, so here we go. Dagon. I need 3,000 watch hours for monetization, and I'm halfway there. I need 1,500 more, a little over 1,500 more, basically 1,550 more to get, not to actual monetization, but to get to the point where I can do memberships and stuff. So, one step at a time, you know? Maybe this would be better if I did that. Maybe it'll catch up less then. I think that might work. All right. Now we're going to read the story. You guys are funny. Dagon. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain. Sincerely, by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, while we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration as due naval prisoners. So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat, with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no islands or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to my very core. The region was putrid, with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing within sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeny of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky black marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing a region for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under the unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side, and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with the graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock, which rose slightly higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day I still traveled towards the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. The fourth evening I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning, fantastically gibbonous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such vision as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glaring of the parched sun, my journey would have cost me less energy, and indeed I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down on the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chasm of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost and of Satan's hideous climb through an unfashioned realm of darkness. Hold on, I have to check that my mug's working. I don't know that it's keeping my tea hot. I don't like cold tea. Nope. They are not connected. What do you mean empty? There's very obviously something in it. Come on. Oh, damn it. My cup's not working. There we go. Now it's back on. My tea got all the way down. So it's called an ember mug. And so it's got a little heater in it. And there's an app on my phone. And the app keeps my coffee or my tea at 135 degrees. My tea is currently at 118 degrees. It's not hot enough. So it's cooling down. It's not yummy. But I've now got it back on. We'll heat it back up to 135 and everybody will be happy. All right. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I can not definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian dips where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it were merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distant impression that its contours and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in the abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping at my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscription and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which were unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carvings, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-relief whose subjects would have excited the envy of Adora. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shewn disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine, which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, they were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shewn in the act of killing a whale represented as but a little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe, some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestors of the Piltdown or Neanderthal men was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of most daring anthropologists, I stood musing, whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Why is the music not working? Oh, it's working. I just don't hear it. No? No, I don't hear any music. Let's go with that instead. Maybe that'll be better. Okay, that's too cheerful, whatever. Sorry, it was distracting me. Okay, we'll go with that. Then suddenly I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, and while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds, I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliffs, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have an indistinct recollection of a great storm some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with the peculiar questionings regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbonous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not have all been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man of war. I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideous vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likeness on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking talons the remnant of a puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when their land shall sink, the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. Dear God, that hand, the window. That was Dagon. With a number of interruptions by yours truly. Yes, Sleepy Hazards, the end is indeed near. I think it found him as well. I believe you are correct. What I really want to do is get a compendium of H.P. Lovecraft creatures. I think that would be fun to read. I'm sure I could find one on the internet, but I want a book. I like books. Books are great. Excuse me. There we go. All right. How about Nyarlathotep? Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. I am the last. I will tell the audient void. I do not recall distinctly when it began, but it was months ago. The general tension was horrible. To a season of political and social upheaval was added a strange and brooding apprehension of hideous physical danger, a danger widespread and all-embracing, such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of the night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces and whispered warnings and prophecies which no one dared consciously repeat or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abyss between the stars swept chill currents, and made men shiver in dark and lonely places. There was a demonic alteration in that sequence of the season. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world and perhaps the universe had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods or forces which were none unknown. It was then that Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was, none can tell, but he was of the old native blood and looked like a pharaoh. The Fellahin knelt when they saw him, yet could not say why. He said he had risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and that he had heard messages from places not on this planet. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal and combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences, of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame to exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see a Nyarlathotep and shuddered, and where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished, for the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmares. Never before had the screams of nightmares been such a public problem. Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the shrieks of the cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon as it glimmered on green waters gliding under bridges and old steeples crumbling against a sickly sky. I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of him and of the impelling fascination and allurement of his revelations, and I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries. My friend said that they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings. That what was thrown on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy, and that in the sputter of his sparks there was taken from men that which had never been taken before, yet which shewed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad that those who knew Nyarlathotep looked on sights which others saw not. It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night with the restless crowds to see Nyarlathotep. Through the stifling night and up into the endless stairs into the choking room, and showed on a screen I saw hooded forms amidst ruins and yellow evil faces peering from behind fallen monuments. And I saw the world battling against blackness, against the waves of destruction from ultimate space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. And then the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators, and hair stood on end whilst the shadows, more grotesque than I can tell, came out and squatted on the heads. And when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a trembling protest about imposture and static electricity. Narlethotep drove us all out, down the dizzying stairs, into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I could not be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swear to one another that the city was exactly the same and still alive, and when the electric lights began to fade, we cursed the company over and over again, and laughed at the queer faces we made. I believe we felt something coming down from the greenish moon, for when we began to depend on its light, we drifted into curious and voluntary formations and seemed to know our destination, though we dared not think of them. Once we looked at the pavement, we found the blocks loose and displaced by grass, with scarce a line of rusted metal to shew where the tramways had run. Again, we saw a tram car, lone, windowless, dilapidated, and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed that the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. Then we split up into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alleyway to the left, leaving only the echoes of a shocking moan. Another filed down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked towards the open country, and presently felt a chill which was not of the hot autumn. For as we stalked out of the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon glitter of evil snows. Trackless, inexplicable snows swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf in the blanket blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin indeed as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green litten snow was frightful. I thought I had heard the reverberation of a disquieting wail as my companions vanished, but my power to linger was slight, as if beckoned by those who had gone before. I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering and afraid into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow, wreathing its hands that are not hands, and whirled blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation, corpses of dead worlds with sores that were cities, charnel winds that brush the pallid stars and make them flicker low. Beyond the worlds, vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples that rest on nameless rocks beneath space and reach up to dizzy vacua above the spheres of light and darkness. And through this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unenlightened chambers beyond time, detestable pounding and piping whereunto dances slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, tenebrous, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles whose soul is Nyarlathotep. Gotta say, the writing's interesting, isn't it? I agree, Jacques. There are very descriptive words with very scary imagery. And honestly, with the way the world's going right now, it's a little creepy. Not gonna lie. If you start hearing about someone coming by to show you guys this kind of stuff, maybe. Hey Grant, how you doing? I'm doing pretty good. Just reading some Lovecraft. Getting ready to read the Nameless City. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it tries to. It certainly makes an effort, but it does convey immensity very well. Immensity and despair. Well, if you're still going after I finish here, yeah, I'll come by. I'm trying to read to it for at least another hour. We'll see how it goes. I've got tea with honey so that hopefully I can read longer than I did last time. Yep, that's just what I was getting into, the Nameless City. Add kick to the overlays. Oh, I'll hey Mo, how you doing? I will have to that is actually a what is it called, guys? What is it called? An extension called Social Ninja. And I have it integrated into OBS, which I then have casting into Restream. It's a whole bunch of craziness I have back here, but it's working. I'm good with it. Botrix, I haven't heard of that one. All right. The Nameless City. When I drew nigh the Nameless City, I knew it was accursed. I was traveling in a parched and terrible valley under the moon, and afar I saw it protruding uncannily above the sands as parts of a corpse may protrude from an ill-made grave. Fear spoke from the age-worn stones of this hoary survivor of the deluge, and this great-grandmother of the eldest pyramid, and a viewless aura repelled me and bade me retreat from antique and sinister secrets that no man should see, and no man has ever dared to see. Remote in the deserts of Araby lies the Nameless City. Crumbling and inarticulate, its low walls nearly hidden by the sands of uncounted ages, it must have been thus before the stones of Memphis were laid, and while the bricks of Babylon were yet unbaked. There is no legend so old as to give it a name or to recall that it was ever alive, but it is told of in whispers around campfires and muttered about by grandmas in their in the tents of sheiks, so that all the tribes shun it without wholly knowing why. It was of this place that Abdul al-Hazred, the mad poet, dreamed on the night before he sang his unexplainable couplet. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. I should have known that the Arabs had good reason for shunning the Nameless City, the city told of in strange tales but seen by no living man. Yet I defied them and went into the untrodden waste with my camel. I alone have seen it, and that is why no face bears such hideous lines of fear as mine, why no man shivers so horribly when the night wind rattles the windows. When I came upon the ghastly stillness of unending sleep, it looked at me, chilly from the rays of a cold moon amidst the desert's heat. And as I returned the look, I forgot my triumph at finding it, and stopped still with my camel to wait for the dawn. For hours I waited, till the east grew gray and the stars faded, and the gray turned to roseal light, edged with gold. I heard a moaning and saw a storm of sand stirring among the antique stones, though the sky was clear and the vast reaches of desert still. Then suddenly above the desert's far rim came the blazing edge of the sun, seen through the tiny sandstorm which was passing away, and in my fervid state, I fancied that from some remote depths there came a crash of musical metal to hail the fiery disk. As Memnon hails from the banks of the Nile, my ears rang and my imagination seethed as I led my camel slowly across the sand to that unvocal stone place, that place too old for Egypt and Meroe to remember, that place which I alone of living men had seen. In and out amongst the shapeless foundation of houses and palaces I wandered, finding never a carving or inscription to tell me of those men, if men they were, who built the city and dwelt therein so long ago. The antiquity of the spot was unwholesome, and I longed to encounter some sign or device to prove that the city was indeed fashioned by mankind. There were certain proportions and dimensions in the ruin I did not like. I had with me many tools and dug much within the walls of the obliterated edifices, but progress was slow and nothing significant was revealed. When night and the moon returned, I felt a chill wind which brought new fear, so that I did not dare to remain in the city. And as I went outside the antique walls to sleep, a small sighing sandstorm gathered behind me, blowing over the gray stone, though the moon was bright and most of the desert still. Listen, Alex, if you're not going to sit quietly and listen to the story, you need to go somewhere else. Go be a cat elsewhere. I awaked just at dawn from a pageant of horrible dreams, my ears ringing from some metallic peal. I saw the sun peering readily through the last gusts of a little sandstorm that hovered over the nameless city and marked the quietness of the rest of the landscape. Once more I ventured within those brooding ruins that swelled beneath the sand like an ogre under a coverlet, and again dug vainly for relics of the forgotten race. At noon I rested, and in the afternoon I spent much time tracing the walls in the bygone streets and the outlines of nearly vanished buildings. I saw that the city had been mighty indeed, and wondered at the sources of its greatness. To myself I pictured all of the splendors of an age so distant that Chaldea could not recall it, and thought of the Sarnath of the doomed, that stood in the land of Manar, while mankind was young, and of Ib, that was carven of great stone before mankind existed. And all at once I came upon a place where the bedrocks rose stark through the stand and formed a low cliff. And here I saw with joy what seemed to promise further traces of the antediluvian people. Hewn rudely on the face of the cliff were the unmistakable facades of several small, squat rock houses or temples, whose interiors might preserve many secrets of ages too remote for calculation. Those sandstorms have long since effaced any carvings which may have been outside. Very low and sand-choked were all of the dark apertures near me, but I cleaned one with my spade and crawled through it, carrying a torch to reveal whatever mysteries it might hold. When I was inside, I saw that the cavern was indeed a temple, and beheld plain sights of the race that had lived and worshipped before the desert was a desert. Primitive altars, pillars, and niches, all curiously low, were not absent. And though I saw no sculptures nor frescoes, There were many singular stones clearly shaped into symbols by artificial means. The lowness of the chiseled chamber was very strange, for I could hardly more than kneel upright, but the area was so great that my torch shewed only part at a time. I shuddered oddly in some of the far corners, for certain altars and stones suggested forgotten rites of terrible, revolting, and inexplicable nature. It made me wonder what manner of men could have made and frequented such a temple. When I had seen all that the place contained, I crawled out again, avid to find what other temples might yield. Night now approached. Night had now approached, yet the tangible things I had seen made curiosity stronger than fear, so that I did not flee from the long, moon-cast shadows that had daunted me when I first saw the nameless city. In the twilight, I cleared another aperture, and with new torch crawled into it, finding more vague stones and symbols, though nothing more definite than the other temple had contained. The room was just as low, but much less broad, ending in a very narrow passage crowded with obscure and cryptical shrines. About these shrines I was prying when the noise of a wind and of my camel outside broke through the stillness and drew me forth to see what could have frightened the beast. The moon was gleaming vividly over the primeval ruins, lighting a dense cloud of sand that seemed blown by a strong but decreasing wind from some point along the cliff ahead of me. I knew it was this chilly, sandy wind which had disturbed the camel and was about to lead him to a place of better shelter when I chanced to glance up and saw that there was no wind atop the cliff. This astonished me and made me fearful again, but I immediately recalled the sudden local winds I had seen and heard before at sunrise and sunset, and judged it was a normal thing. I decided that it had come from some rock fissure leading to a cave, and watched the troubled sand to trace it to its source, soon perceiving that it came from the back orifice of a temple a long distance south of me, almost out of sight. Against the choking sand cloud, I plodded towards this temple, which I neared as it loomed larger than the rest, and shewed a doorway far less clogged with caked sand. I would have entered it had not the terrific force of the icy wind almost quenched my torch. It poured madly out of the dark door, sighing uncannily as it ruffled the sand and spread about the weird ruins. Soon it grew fainter and the sand grew more and more still, till finally it was at rest again. But a presence seemed stalking among the spectral stones of the city, and when I glanced at the moon, it seemed to quiver, as though mirrored in unquiet waters. I was more afraid than I could explain, but not enough to dull my thirst for wonder. So as soon as the wind was quite gone, I crossed into the dark chamber from which it had come. Thank you, Derp. The temple, as I had fancied from the outside, was larger than either of those I had visited before, and was presumably a natural cavern, since it bore winds from some region beyond. Here I could stand quite upright, but saw that the stones and the altars were as low as those in the other temples. On the walls and roof I beheld for the first time some traces of the pictorial art of the ancient race. Curious curling streaks of paint had almost faded or crumbled away, and on two of the altars I saw with rising excitement a maze of well-fashioned curvilinear carvings. As I held my torch aloft, it seemed to me that the shape of the roof was too regular to be unnatural. And I wondered what the prehistoric cutters of the stone had first worked upon. Their engineering skills must have been vast. I don't. You're the only one talking right now. Then a brighter flare of the fantastic flame shooed me for that which I had been seeking. The opening to those remoter abysses, whether the sudden wind had blown, and I grew faint when I saw that it was small and plainly artificial door chiseled in the solid rock. I thrust my torch within, beholding a black tunnel with the roof arching low over a rough flight of very small, numerous, and steeply descending steps. I shall always see those steps in my dream, for I came to learn what they meant. At the time, I hardly knew whether to call them steps or mere footholds in a precipitous descent. My mind was whirling with mad thoughts, and the words and warnings of Arab prophets seemed to float across the desert from the land that men known to the nameless city that men dare not know. Yet I hesitated only a moment before advancing through the portal and commencing to climb cautiously down from the steep passage, feet first, as though on a ladder. It is only in the terrible phantasm of drugs or delirium that any other man can have such a descent as mine. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and the torch I held above my head could not light the unknown depths towards which I was crawling. I lost track of the hours and forgot to consult my watch, though I was frightened when I thought of the distance I must be traversing. There were changes of direction and steepness, and once I came to a long, low, level passage where I had to wriggle feet first along the rocky floor, holding my torch at arm's length beyond my head. The place was not high enough for kneeling. After that were more of the stone of the steep steps, and I was still scrambling down interminably when my failing torch died out. I did not think I noticed at the time, for when I did notice, I was holding it high above me as if it were ablaze. I was quite unbalanced with that instinct for the strange and unknown which had made me wander upon earth, and a haunter of far ancient and forbidden places. In the darkness, there flashed before my mind fragments of my chiseled treasury of demonic lore, sentences from Al has read The Mad Arab, paragraphs from the apocryphal nightmares of Damascus, and infamous lines from the delirious Image du Monde of Gauthier de Metz. I repeated queer extracts and muttered of Aphrodite and the demons that floated with him down the Oxus, later chanting over and over again a phrase from one of the Lord Dunacy's tales, the unreverberated blackness of the abyss. Once, when the descent grew amazingly steep, I recited something in sing-song from Thomas Moore until I feared to recite more. A reservoir of darkness, black as witches' cauldrons are when filled with moon's drugs, in the eclipse distilled. Leaning to look if foot might pass, down through the chamber I saw beneath, as far a vision could explore, the jetty sides as smooth as glass, looking as if just varnished ore, with that dark pitch the sea of death throws out upon its slimy shore. Time had quite ceased to exist when my feet again felt a level floor, and I found myself in a place higher than the rooms in the two smaller temples, now incalculably far above my head. I could not quite stand, but I could kneel upright, and in the dark I shuffled and crept hither and thither at random. I soon knew I was in a narrow passage whose walls were lined with cases of wood having glass fronts. As in that Paleozoic and abysmal place, I felt of such things as polished wood and glass. I shuddered at the possible implications. The cases were apparently arranged along each of the side of the passage at regular intervals and were oblong and horizontal, hideously like coffins in shape and size. When I tried to move 2 or 3 for further examination, I found they were firmly fastened. I saw that the passage was a long one, and that was weird. Found that the passage was a long one, so floundered ahead rapidly in a creeping run that would have seemed horrible had any eye watched me in the blackness, crossing from side to side occasionally to feel of my surroundings and to be sure the wall rows of cases still stretched out. Man is so used to thinking visually that I almost forgot the darkness and pictured the endless corridor of wood and glass in its low-studded monotony, as though I saw it. And then in a moment of indescribable emotion, I did see it. Just when my fancy merged into sight, I cannot tell, but there came a gradual glow ahead, and all at once I knew I saw the dim outlines of the corridor and the cases revealed by some unknown subterranean phosphorescence. For a little while, all was exactly as I had imagined it, since the glow was very faint. But as I mechanically kept on stumbling ahead into the stronger light, I realized my fancy had been but feeble. This hall was no relic of crudity like the temples in the city above, but a monument of the most magnificent and exotic art. Rich, vivid, and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural paintings whose lines and colors were beyond description. The cases were of a strange golden wood, with fronts of exquisite glass, and contained the mummified forms of creatures, outreaching in grotesqueness the most chaotic dreams of man. To convey any idea of those monstrosities is impossible. They were of the reptile kind, with body lines suggesting something in the crocodile, sometimes the seal, but more often nothing of which either the naturalist or paleontologist ever heard. In size, they approximated a small man, and their forelegs bore delicate and evidently flexible feet curiously like human hands and fingers. But strangest of all were their heads, which presented a contour violating all known biological principles. To nothing can such things be well compared. In one flash, I thought of comparison as varied as the cat, the bulldog, the mythic satyr, and the human being. Not Jove himself had so colossal and protuberant a forehead. Yet the horns and noselessness and the alligator-like jaw placed these things outside all established categories. I debated for a time on reality of the mummies, half suspecting they were artificial idols, but soon decided they were indeed some Paleogean species which had lived when the nameless city was alive. To crown their grotesqueness, most of them were gorgeously enrobed in the costliest of fabrics, and lavishly laden with ornaments of gold, jewels, and unknown shining metals. The importance of these crawling creatures must have been vast, for they held first place among the wild designs on the frescoed walls and ceilings. With matchless skill had the artists drawn them in a world of their own, wherein they had cities and gardens fashioned to suit their dimensions, and I could not but think that their pictured history was allegorical, perhaps shewing the progress of the race that had worshipped them. These creatures, I said to myself, were to the men of the nameless city what the she-wolf was to Rome, or some totem beast to a tribe of Indians. Holding this view, I thought I could trace roughly the wonderful epic of the nameless city, a tale of mighty sea-coast metropolis that ruled the world before Africa rose out of the waves, and of its struggles as the sea shrank away and the desert crept into the fertile valley that hid it. I saw wars and triumphs, its troubles and defeats, and afterwards its terrible fight against the desert, when thousands of its people, here represented in allegory by the grotesque reptiles, were driven to chisel their way down through the rocks in some marvelous manner to another world whereof their prophets had told them. It was all vividly weird and realistic, and its connection with the awesome descent I had made was unmistakable. I even recognized the passages. As I crept along the corridor towards the brighter light, I saw later stages of the painted epic. The leave-taking of the race that had dwelt in the nameless city, and the valley around for 10 million years, the race whose souls shrank from quitting scenes for their bodies had known so long, where they had settled as nomads in the earth's youth, hewing the virgin rock those primal shrines at which they had never ceased to worship. Now that the light was better, I studied the pictures more closely, and, remembering that the strange reptiles must represent the unknown men, pondered upon the customs of the nameless city. Many things were peculiar and inexplicable. The civilization, which included a written alphabet and had seemingly risen to a higher order than those immeasurably later civilizations of Egypt and Chaldea. Yet there were curious omissions I could, for example, find no pictures to represent deaths or funeral customs, save such as were related to wars, violence, and plagues. I wondered at the reticence shewn concerning natural death. It was as though an ideal of earthly immortality had been fostered as a cheering illusion. Still nearer the end of the passage were painted scenes of the utmost picturesqueness and extravagance, contrasted views of the nameless city in its desertion and grown ruin, and of the strange new realm or paradise to which the race had hewed its way through the stone. And these views of the city and desert valley were shewn away by moonlight, a golden nimbus hovering over the fallen walls, half revealing the splendid perfection of its former times. Shewn spectrally and elusively by the artists, paradisal scenes were almost too extravagant to be believed, portraying a hidden world of eternal day filled with glorious cities and ethereal halls and valleys. At the very last, I thought I saw a sign of artistic anticlimax. The paintings were less skillful and much more bizarre than even the wildest of the early scenes. They seemed to record a slow decadence of the ancient stock, coupled with a growing ferocity towards the outside world from which it was driven by the desert. The forms of the people, always represented by the scaled reptiles, appeared to be gradually wasting away, though their spirit, as shewn hovering about the ruins by moonlight, gained in proportion. Emaciated priests, displaying as reptiles in ornate robes, cursed the upper air and all who breathed it, and one terrible final scene shewed a primitive-looking man, perhaps the pioneer of ancient Iram, the city of pillars, torn to pieces by members of the elder race. I remember how the Arabs feared the nameless city, and was glad that beyond this place the gray walls and ceilings were bare. As I viewed the pageant of mural history, I had approached very closely the end of the low sealed hall, and was aware of a great gate through which came all of the illuminating phosphorescence. Creeping up to it, I cried aloud in transcendent amazement at what lay beyond, for instead of another brighter chamber, there was only an illuminable void of uniform radiance, such as one might fancy when gazing down from the peak of Mount Everest upon a sea of sunlit mist. Beyond me was a passage so cramped that I could not stand upright in it. Before me was an infinity of subterranean effulgence. Reaching down from the passage into the abyss was the head of a steep flight of stairs, small, numerous steps like those of the black passage I had traversed. But after a few feet, the glowing vapors concealed everything. Swung back open against the left-handed wall of the passage was a massive door of brass, incredibly thick and decorated with fantastic bas-reliefs, which could only, if closed shut, the whole inner world of light away from the vaults and passages of rock. I looked at the steps, and for the nonce dared not try them. I touched the open brass door, and it could not move. Then I sank prone to the stone floor, my mind aflame with prodigious reflections which not even a death-like exhaustion could banish. I lay still with eyes closed, free to ponder. Many things I had lightly noticed in the frescoes came back to me with new and terrible significance. Scenes representing the nameless city in its heyday, the vegetation of the valley around it, and the distant lands in which its merchants traded. The allegory of the crawling creatures puzzled me by its universal prominence, and I wondered that it should be so closely followed in a pictured history of such importance. In the frescoes, the nameless city had been shewn in proportions fitted to the reptiles. I wondered what its real proportions of magnificence had been, and reflected on a moment on certain oddities I had noticed in the ruins. I thought curiously of the lowness of the primal temples and of the underground corridor, which were doubtlessly hewn thus out of deference to the reptile deities there honored, though it perforce reduced the worshippers to crawling. Perhaps the very rites had involved a crawling in imitation of the creatures. No religious theory, however, could easily explain why the level passage in that awesome descent should be as low as the temple, or lower, since one could not even kneel in it. As I thought of the crawling creatures whose hideous mummified forms were so close to me, I felt a new throb of fear. Mental associations are curious, and I shrank from the idea that except for the poor primitive man torn to pieces in the last painting, mine was the only human form amongst many relics and symbols of primordial life. But as always, in my strange and roving existence, wonder soon drove out fear, for the luminous abyss and what it might contain presented a problem worthy of the greatest explorer. In a weird world of mystery lay far down that flight of peculiarly small steps I could not doubt, and I hoped to find there those human memorials which the painted corridor had failed to give. The frescoes had pictured unbelievable cities, hills, and valleys in this lower realm, and my fancy dwelt on the rich and colossal ruins that awaited me. My fears, indeed, concerned the past rather than the future. Not even the physical horror of my position, that cramped corridor of dead reptiles and antediluvian frescoes, miles below the world I knew and faced by another world of eerie light and mist, could match the lethal dread I felt at the abysmal antiquity of the scene and its soul. An ancientness so vast that measurement is feeble seemed to leer down from the primal stones and rock-hewn temples in the nameless city, while the very latest of the astounding maps in the frescoes shewed oceans and continents that man had forgotten, with only here and there some vaguely familiar outline of what could have happened in the geological aeon since the paintings ceased and the death-hating race resentfully succumbed to decay. No man might say. Life had once teemed in these caverns and in the luminous realm beyond. Now I was alone with vivid relics. I trembled to think of the countless ages through which those relics had kept a silent and deserted vigil. Suddenly there came another burst of that acute fear which had intermittently seized me ever since I first saw the terrible valley and the nameless city under a cold moon, and despite my exhaustion I found myself starting frantically to a sitting posture and gazing back along the black corridor towards the tunnels that rose to the outer world. My sensations were much like those who had made me shun the nameless city at night, and were as inexplicable as they were poignant. In another moment, however, I received a still greater shock in the form of a definite sound, the first which had broken the utter silence in these tomb-like depths. It was a deep, low moaning, as of a distant throng of condemned spirits, and it came from the direction in which I was staring. Its volume grew rapidly until soon it was reverberating frightfully through the low passage, and at the same time I became conscious of an increasing draught of cold air likewise flowing from the tunnel in the city above. The touch of this air seemed to restore my balance, for I instantly recalled the sudden gust which had risen around the mouth of the abyss each sunset and sunrise, one of which was indeed served to reveal the hidden tunnel to me. I looked at my watch and saw that the sunrise was near. So braced myself to resist the gale which was sweeping down to the cavern home as it had swept forth at evening. My fear again waned low, since a natural phenomenon tends to dispel brooding over the unknown. More and more madly poured the shrieking, moaning night wind into that gulf of the inner earth. I dropped prone again and clutched vainly at the floor for fear of being swept bodily through the open gate and into the phosphorescent abyss. Such fury I had not expected, and as I grew aware of an actual slipping of my form towards the abyss, I was beset by 1,000 new terrors of apprehension and imagination. The malignancy of the blast awakened incredible fancies. Once more I compare myself shuddering to the only other human image in that frightful corridor, the man who was torn to pieces by the nameless race, for the fiendish clawing of the swirling currents. There seemed to abide a vindictive rage, all the stronger because it was largely impotent. I think I screamed frantically near the last. I was almost mad. But if I did so, my cries were lost in the hell-born babble of the wind wraiths. I tried to crawl against the murderous invisible torrent, but I could not even hold my own as I was pushed slowly and inexorably towards the unknown world. Finally, reason must have wholly snapped, for I fell to babbling over and over that unexplained couplet of the mad Arab Alhazred, who dreamed of this nameless city. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. Only the grim brooding desert gods know what really took place, what indescribable struggles and scrambles in the dark I endured, or what Abaddon guided me back to life, where I must always remember and shiver in the night wind till oblivion, or worse, claims me. Monstrous, unnatural, colossal was the thing, too far beyond all the ideas of man to be believed, except in the sudden, damnable small hours when one cannot sleep. I have said that the fury of the rushing blast was infernal, cacodemoniacal, and that its voices were hideous with the pent-up viciousness of desolate eternities. Presently, those voices, while still chaotic before me, seemed to my beating brain to articulate form behind me. And down there in the grave of unnumbered aeon dead-end antiquities, leagues below the dawn-lit world of man, I heard ghastly cursing and snarling of strange-tongued fiends. Turning, I saw outlining against the luminous aether the abyss of what could not be seen against the dusk of the corridor. A nightmare horde of rushing devils, hate-distorted, grotesquely panoplied? Interesting word. Half-transparent devils of a race no man might mistake, the crawling reptiles of the nameless city. And as the wind died away, I was plunged into the ghoul-peopled blackness of the earth's bowels, for behind the last of the creatures, the great brazen door clanged shut with a deafening peal of metallic music, whose reverberation swelled out to the distant world to hail the rising sun as Memnon hails it from the banks of the Nile. And that's the end of that one. It's an interesting word. I'm going to have to look that one up. I don't know that I really know that word. Where'd the music go again? Ten out of 10 would vacation in the nameless city again. Absolutely. Panoplied. Okay. I said it wrong. What? Oh, come on. Turn on. I can't hear any music. Can you guys? Well, no, that's irritating. There it is. I mean, it's one thing when I'm reading, but if I need a second, I would like the music to be there in the background. Aw. Well, sweet dreams, Jock. Feel free to leave it up. I mean, I could use the watch hours. All right, this next is short. It's called Azathoth, for those of you who are curious about more of the eldritch creatures. Sweet dreams, Jock. Thank you so much for being here. I do appreciate it. Of course, I definitely enjoying these nights when I just read to everybody, and it's nice to be able to do these stories specifically. Azathoth. When age fell upon the world, and wonder went out of the minds of men, when gray cities reared to smoky skies, tall towers grim and ugly, in whose shadows none might dream of the sun or of spring's flowering meads, when learning stripped earth of her mantle and beauty, and poets sang no more save of the twisted phantoms seen with bleared and inward-looking eyes. When these things had come to pass, and childish hope had gone away forever, there was a man who traveled out of life on a quest into the spaces whither the world's dreams had fled. Of the name and abode of this man but little is written, for they were of the walking world only. Yet it is said that both were obscure. It is enough to know that he dwelt in a city of high walls, where sterile twilight reigned, and that he toiled all day among shadow and turmoil, coming home at evening to a room whose on one window opened not on the field and groves, but on a dim court, where other windows stared in dull despair. From that casement, one might see only walls and windows, except sometimes when one leaned far out and peered aloft at the small stars that passed. And because mere walls and windows must soon drive to madness a man who dreams and reads much, the dweller in that room used night after night to lean out and peer aloft to glimpse some fragment of things beyond the waking world and grayness of tall cities. After years, he began to call the slow-sailing stars by name and to follow them in fancy when they glided regretfully out of sight, till at length his vision opened to many secret vistas whose existence no common eye suspects. One night, a mighty gulf was bridged, and the dream-haunted skies swelled down to the lonely watcher's window to merge with the close air of his room and make him a part of their fabulous wonder. There came to that room wild streams of violet midnight, glittering with dust of gold, vortices of dust and fire, swirling out of the ultimate spaces, heavy with perfumes from beyond the worlds. Opiate oceans poured there, litten by suns that the eye may never behold, and having in their whirlpools strange dolphins and sea nymphs of unrememberable deeps. Thank you, Jock. I really appreciate that. Noiseless infinity eddied around the dreamer and wafted him away without even touching the body that leaned stiffly from the lonely window. And for days not counted in men's calendars, the tides of far spheres bared him gently to join the dreams for which he longed, and the dreams that men have lost. And in the course of many cycles, they tenderly left him sleeping on a green sunrise shore, a green shore, fragrant with lotus blossoms and starred by red camelots. Hey Dave, how's it going? The Hound. In my tortured ears sounds unceasingly a nightmare whirring and flapping, a faint distant baying of some gigantic hound. It is not dream, it is not, I fear, even madness, for too much has already happened to give me these merciful doubts. St. John is a mangled corpse, I alone know why, and such is my knowledge that I am about to blow out my brains for fear I shall be mangled in the same way. Down unlit and in illimitable corridors of eldritch fantasy sweeps the black, shapeless nemesis that drives me to self-annihilation. May heaven forgive the folly and morbidity which led us both to so monstrous a fate, wearied the commonplace of a prosaic world, where even the joys of romance and adventure soon grow stale. St. John and I had followed enthusiastically every aesthetic and intellectual movement which promised respite from our devastating ennui. Enigmas of the symbolists and the ecstasies of the pre-Raphaelites, all were ours in their time. But each new mood drained too soon of its diverting novelty and appeal. Only the somber philosophy of the decadents could hold us, and this we found potent only by increasing gradually the depths and diabolism of our penetrations. Baldier and Huysmans were soon exhausted of thrills, till finally there remained for us only more direct stimuli of unnatural personal experiences and adventures. It was this frightened emotional need which led us eventually to that detestable course which even in my present fear I mention with shame and timidity, that hideous extremity of human outrage, the abhorred practice of grave robbing. I cannot reveal the details of our shocking expeditions or catalog even partly the worst of our trophies adorning the nameless museum we prepared in the great stone house where we jointly dwelt alone and servantless. Our museum was a blasphemous, unthinkable place where, with a satanic taste of neutroic virtuosi, we had assembled a universe of terror and decay to excite our jaded sensibilities. It was a secret room, far, far underground, where huge winged daemons carved out of basalt and onyx vomited from wide grinning mouths, weird green and orange light, and hidden pneumatic pipes ruffled in kaleidoscope dances of death, the lines of red charnel things, hand in hand woven in voluminous black hangings. Though these pipes came at will the odors of our moods most craved. Sometimes the scent of pale funeral lilies, sometimes the narcotic incense of imagined eastern shrines of the kingly dead, and sometimes, how I shudder to recall it, the frightening, soul upheaving stenches of the uncovered grave. Grace, get out of there! Grace! No! Damn dog getting at the trash can. Around the walls of this repellent chamber were cases of antique mummies, alternating with comely, lifelike bodies, perfectly stuffed and cured by the taxidermist's art, with headstones snatched from the oldest churchyards of the world. Niches here and there contained skulls of all shapes and heads preserved in various stages of dissolution. One might find the rotting bald pates of famous noblemen and the fresh and radiant golden heads of new buried children. Statues and paintings there were, all of fiendish subjects and some executed by St. John and myself. A locked portfolio, bound in tanned human skin, held certain unknown and unnameable drawings which it was rumored Goya had perpetuated but dared not acknowledge. There were nauseous musical instruments, stringed, brass, and woodwind, on which St. John and I sometimes produced dissonance of exquisite morbidity and cacodemical ghastliness. Whilst in a multitude of inlaid ebony cabinets reposed the most incredible and unimaginable variety of tomb loot ever assembled by human madness and perversity. It is of this loot in particular I must not speak. Thank God I had the courage to destroy it long before I thought of destroying myself. The predatory excursions on which we collected our unmentionable treasures were always artistically memorable events. We were no vulgar ghouls, but worked only under certain conditions of mood, landscape, environment, weather, season, and moonlight. These pastimes were to us the most exquisite form of aesthetic expression, and we gave their detail a fastidious technical care. An inappropriate hour, a jarring lighting effect, or a clumsy manipulation of the damp sod would almost totally destroy for us that ecstatic titillation which followed the exhumation of some ominous grinning secret of the earth. Our quest for novel scenes and piquant conditions were feverish and insatiate. St. John was always the leader, and he it was who led the way at last to that mocking, accursed spot which brought us our hideous and inevitable doom. By what malign fatally, yeah, we were lured to that terrible Holland churchyard. I think it was the dark rumor and legendary, the tales of one buried for 5 centuries, who had himself been a ghoul in his time and stolen a potent thing from a mighty sculpture. I can recall the scene in these final moments, the pale autumnal moon over the graves, casting long, horrible shadows, the grotesque trees drooping sullenly to meet the neglected grass and crumbling slabs, the vast legions of strangely colossal bats that flew against the moon, the antique ivory church pointing a huge spectral finger at the livid sky, the phosphorescent insects that danced like death fires under the yews in a distant corner, the odors of mold, vegetation, and less inexplicable things mingled feebly with the night wind from over far swamps and seas, and worst of all, the faint, deep-toned baying of some gigantic hound which we could neither see nor definitely place. As we heard the suggestion of baying, we shuddered, remembering the tales of the peasantry, for he whom we sought had centuries before been found in this self-same spot, torn and mangled by the claws and teeth of some unspeakable beast. I remembered how we delved into the ghoul's grave with our spades, and how we thrilled at the picture of ourselves, the grave, the pale watching moon, the horrible shadows, the grotesque trees, the titanic bats, the antique church, the dancing death fires, the sickening odors, the gentle moaning night wind, and the strange, half-heard, directionless baying, of whose objective existence we could scarcely be sure. When we struck a substance harder than damp mold and beheld a rotting oblong box crusted with mineral deposits from long undisturbed ground, it was incredibly tough and thick, but so old that we finally pried it open and feasted our eyes on what it held. Much, amazingly much, was left of the object despite the lapse of 500 years. The skeleton, though crushed in places by the jaw of the thing that had killed it, held together with surprising firmness, and we gloated over the clean white skull and its long, firm teeth and its eyeless sockets that once had glowed with a charnel fever like our own. In the coffin lay an amulet of curious and exotic design, which had apparently been worn around the sleeper's neck. It was the oddly conventionalized figure of a crouching winged hound or a sphinx with a semi-canine face. It was exquisitely carved in antique oriental fashion from a small piece of green jade. The expression on its features was repellent in the extreme, savoring at once of death, bestiality, and malevolence. Around the base was an inscription in characters which neither St. John nor I could identify, and on the bottom, like a maker's seal, was graven a grotesque and formidable skull. Immediately upon beholding the amulet, we knew that we must possess it. That this treasure alone was our logical pelf from this centuried grave. Even had its outlines been unfamiliar, we would have desired it. But as we looked at it more closely, we saw that it was not wholly unfamiliar. Alien it indeed was to all art and literature which sane and balanced readers know, but we recognize it as a thing hinted in the forbidden Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, the ghastly soul symbol of the corpse-eating cult of inaccessible Leng in Central Asia. All too well did we trace the sinister lineaments described by the old Arab demonologist, lineaments, he wrote, drawn from some obscure supernatural manifestation of the souls who vexed and gnawed at the dead. Seizing the green jade object, we gave a last glance at the bleached and cavernous face of the owner and closed up the grave as we found it. As we hastened from the abhorrent spot, the stolen amulet in St. John's pocket, we thought we saw the bats descend in a body to the earth we had so lately rifled, as if seeking for some cursed and unholy nourishment. But the autumn moon shone weak and pale, and we could not be sure. So too we sailed the next day away from Holland to our home. We thought we heard the faint, distant baying of some gigantic hound in the background. But the autumn wind moaned, sad and wan, and we could not be sure. Less than a week after our return to England, strange things began to happen. We lived as recluses, devoid of friends, alone, and without servants in a few rooms of the ancient manor house on a bleak, unfrequented moor, so that our doors were seldom disturbed by the knock of visitors. Now, however, we were troubled by what seemed to be frequent fumblings in the night, not only around the doors, but around the windows, upper as well as lower. We fancied that a large, opaque body darkened the library window when the moon was shining against it, and another time we thought we heard a whirring or flapping sound not far off. On each occasion, investigation revealed nothing, and we began to ascribe the occurrences to imagination alone. The same curiously disturbed imagination which still prolonged in our ears the faint, far baying we thought we had heard in the Holland churchyard. The jade amulet now reposed in a niche in our museum, and sometimes we burned strange scented candles before it. We read much in all Hasred's Necronomicon about its properties, and about the relation of ghouls' souls to the objects it symbolized, and were disturbed by what we read. Then terror came. On the night of September 24th, 19 redacted, I heard a knock at my chamber door. Fancying it St. John's, I bade the knocker enter, but was only answered by a shrill laugh. There was no one in the corridor. When I aroused St. John from his sleep, he professed entire ignorance of the event, and became as worried as I. It was that night that the faint, distant baying over the moor became to us certain and dreadful reality. 4 days later, while we were both in the hidden museum, there came a low, cautious scratching at the single door which led to the secret library staircase. Our alarm was now divided, for besides our fears of the unknown, we had always entertained a dread that our grisly collection might be discovered. Extinguishing all lights, we proceeded to the door and threw it open suddenly, whereupon we felt an unaccountable rush of air and heard, as if receding far away, a queer combination of rustling, tittering, and articulate chatter. Whether we were mad, dreaming in our senses, we did not try to determine. We only realized with the blackest of apprehensions that the apparently disembodied chatter was beyond a doubt in the Dutch language. After that, we lived in growing horror and fascination. Mostly we held to the theory that we were jointly going mad from our life of unnatural excitements, but sometimes it pleased us more to dramatize ourselves as the victims of some creeping and appalling doom. Bizarre manifestations were now too frequent to count. Our lonely house was seemingly alive with the presence of some malign being whose nature we could not guess, and every night that demonic baying rolled over the windswept moors, always louder and louder. On October 29th, we found on the soft earth underneath the library windows a series of footprints utterly impossible to describe. They were as baffling as the hordes of great bats which haunted the old manor house in unprecedented and increasing numbers. The horror reached a culmination on November 18th, when St. John, walking home after dark from the distant railway station, was seized by some frightful carnivorous thing and torn to ribbons. His screams had reached the house, and I had hastened to the terrible scene in time to hear a whir of wings and see a vague black cloudy thing silhouetted against the rising moon. My friend was dying when I spoke to him, and he could not answer coherently. All he could do was whisper, "The amulet. That damned thing." And then he collapsed, an inert mass of mangled flesh. I buried him the next midnight in one of our neglected gardens, and mumbled over his body of the devilish rituals he had loved in life. As I pronounced the last demonic sentence, I heard afar on the moor the faint baying of some gigantic hound. The moon was up, but I dared not look at it. And when I saw on the dim-lit moor a wide, nebulous shadow sweeping from mound to mound, I shut my eyes and threw myself face down upon the ground. When I arose trembling, I know not how much later, I staggered into the house and made shopping obeisance before the enshrined amulet of green jade. Being now afraid to live alone in this ancient house on the moor, I departed the following day for London, taking with me the amulet after destroying by fire and burial the rest of the impious collection in the museum. But after 3 nights I heard the baying again, and before a week was over felt strange eyes upon me whenever it was dark. One evening I strolled on Victoria Embankment for some needed air, and I saw a black shape obscure one of the reflections of the lamps in the water. Grace! Speaking of hounds, I got one trying to get in the trash. A wind stronger than night wind rushed by, and I knew what had befallen St. John must soon befall me. The next day, I carefully wrapped the green jade amulet and sailed for Holland. What mercy I might gain by returning the thing to its silent, sweeping owner, I knew not, but I felt I must at least try in any step conceivably logical. The hound was, and why it pursued me. What the hound was and why it pursued me were questions still vague. But I had first heard the baying in that ancient churchyard, and every subsequent event, including John's dying whisper, had served to connect the curse with the stealing of the amulet. Accordingly, I sank into the nethermost abysses of despair. At the inn in Rotterdam, I discovered that the thieves had despoiled me of the sole means of salvation. The baying was loud that evening, and in the morning I read of a nameless deed in the vilest quarter of the city. The rabble were in terror, for upon an evil tenement had fallen a red death beyond the foulest previous crimes of the neighborhood. Excuse me. In a squalid thief's den, an entire family had been torn to shreds by an unknown thing which left no trace, and those around had heard all night, above the usual clamor of drunken voices, a faint, deep, insistent note of a gigantic hound. So at last I stood in that unwholesome churchyard, where a pale winter moon cast hideous shadows and leafless trees drooped sullenly to meet the withered, frosty grass, crackling slabs, and the ivied church pointed a jeering finger at the unfriendly sky, and the night wind howled maniacally from over frozen swamps and frigid seas. The baying was very faint now, and it ceased altogether as I approached the ancient grave I had once violated, and frightened away an abnormally large horde of bats, which had been hovering cautiously or curiously around it. I know not why I went thither unless to pray or gibber out insane pleas and apologies to the calm white thing that lay within. But whatever my reason, I attacked the half-frozen sod with a desperation partly mine and partly that of a dominating will outside myself. Excavation was much easier than I expected, though at one point I encountered a queer interruption, when a lean vulture darted down out of the cold sky and pecked frantically at the grave earth until I killed him with a blow of my spade. Finally, I reached the rotting oblong box and had removed the damp nitrous cover. This is the last rational act I ever performed. For crouched within that centuried coffin, embraced by a close-packed nightmare retinue of huge, sinewy, sleeping bats, was the bony thing my friend and I had robbed. Not clean and placid as we had seen it then, but covered with caked blood and shreds of alien flesh and hair, leering sentiently at me with phosphorescent sockets and sharp, ensanguined fangs, yawning twistedly in a mockery of my inevitable doom. And when it gave from those grinning jaws a deep, sardonic bay of some kind of gigantic hound, I saw that it held in its gory, filthy claws the lost and fateful amulet of green jade. I merely screamed and ran away idiotically, my screams soon devolving into peals of hysterical laughter. Madness rides the star wind. Claws and teeth sharpened on centuries of corpses, dripping death astride a bacchanal of bats from night-black ruins of buried temples of Belial. Now, as the baying of that dead, fleshless monstrosity grows louder and louder, and the steady whirring and flapping of those accursed webbed wings circles closer and closer, I shall seek with my revolver the oblivion which is my only refuge from the unnamed and the unnameable. Night, Derp. Sweet dreams. Extra tired today. Came back from Turkey, went straight to the gym, and you're going to Germany on Sunday. Wow. You're just a busy, busy boy, aren't you? Let's see here. It's 12, and this next story's like 4 pages long. 4? 6? Maybe more like 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, God. No, it's like 8 pages long. What do you guys think? One more story? Yes? No? Excuse me. Let's see here. Now, the next one up after this is the Call of Cthulhu. Well, let's see if I can get through it. My voice is getting a little rough, but might as well try. This is the festival. Effusiant Damon. Oh, I can't read that. That's in Latin. I don't read Latin. Having enough problems with English. It was far from home, and the spell of the eastern sea was upon me. In the twilight, I heard it pounding on the rocks, and I knew it lay just over the hill where the twisting willows writhed against the clearing sky and the first stars of evening. And because my fathers had called me to the old town beyond, I pushed on through the shallow, new-fallen snow along the road that soared lonely up to where Aldebaran twinkled among the trees, on towards the very ancient town I had never seen but often dreamt of. It was Yuletide, that men call Christmas, though they know in their hearts it was older than Bethlehem and Babylon, older than Memphis and mankind. It was the Yuletide. And I had come at last to the ancient seen town where my people had dwelt and kept festival in elder times when festival was forbidden, where they also had commanded their sons to keep festival once every century, and the memory of primal secrets must not be forgotten. Mine were an old people, and were old even when this land was settled 300 years before. and they were strange because they had come as dark, furtive folk from opiate southern gardens of orchids and spoken another tongue before they learnt the tongues of the blue-eyed fishers. And now they were scattered, shared only the rituals of mystery that none living could understand. I was the only one who came back that night to the old fishing town as legend bade, for only the poor and the lonely remember. Then beyond the hill's crest, I saw Kingsport outspread frostily in the gloaming. Snowy Kingsport with its ancient vanes and steeples, ridgeposts and chimney pots, wharves and small bridges, willow trees and graveyards, endless labyrinths of steep, narrow, crooked streets, and dizzy church-crowned central peak that time durst not touch. Ceaseless mazes of colonial houses piled and scattered at all angles and levels like a child's disordered blocks, antiquity, hovering on gray wings over winter-whitened gables and gambrel roofs, fanlights and small panel windows one by one gleaming out on the cold dusk to join Orion and the archaic stars. And against the rotting wharves the sea pounded, secretive, immemorable sea out of which the people had came in elder times. Beside the road at its crest the still higher summit rose, bleak and windswept, and I saw that it was a burying ground where black gravestones stuck ghoulishly through the snow like the decaying fingernails of a gigantic corpse. The printless road was very lonely, and sometimes I thought I heard a distant horrible creaking of a gibbet in the wind. They had hanged 4 kinsmen of mine for witchcraft in 1962, but I did not know just where. As the road wound down the seaward slope, I listened for the merry sound of a village at the evening, but I did not hear them. Then I thought of the season and felt these old Puritan folk might well have Christmas customs strange to me, and full of silent hearthside prayer. So after that I did not listen for merriment or look for wayfarers, but kept on down past the hushed, lighted farmhouses and shadowy stone walls to where the signs of ancient shops and sea taverns creaked in the salt breeze, and the grotesque knockers of pillared doorways glistened among deserted, unpaved lanes in the light of little curtained windows. I had seen maps of the town and knew where to find the home of my people. It was told that I should be known and welcomed, for village legend lives long. So I hastened through back street to Circle Court, across the fresh snow on the one full flagstone pavement in the town, to where Green Lane leads off behind the market house. The old map still held good, and I had no trouble, though at the Arkham they must have lied when they said the trolleys ran to this place, since I saw not a wire overhead. Snow would have hid the rails in any case. I was glad I had chosen to walk, for the white village had seemed very beautiful from the hill, and now I was eager to knock at the door of my people, the 7th house on the left in Green Lane, with an ancient peaked roof and jutting second story, all built before 1650. There were lights inside the house when I came upon it, and I saw from the diamond window panes that it must have been kept very close to its antique state. The upper part overhung the narrow grass-grown street and nearly met the overhanging part of the house opposite, so that I was almost in a tunnel with the low stone door steps wholly free from snow. There was no sidewalk, but many houses had high doors reached by double flights of steps with iron railings. It was an odd scene, and because I was strange to New England, I had never known its like before. Though It pleased me. I would have relished better if there had been footprints in the snow and people in the street, and a few windows without drawn curtains. When I sounded the archaic iron knocker, I was half afraid. Some fear had been gathering in me, perhaps because of the strangeness of my heritage, and the bleakness of the evening, and the queerness of the silence in that aged town of curious customs. And when the knock was answered, I was fully afraid because I had not heard any footsteps before the door creaked open. But I was not afraid long, for the gowned, slippered old man in the doorway had a bland face that reassured me. And though he had made signs that he was dumb, he wrote a quaint and ancient welcome with the stylus and wax tablet he carried. He beckoned me into the low, candlelit room with massive exposed rafters and dark, stiff, sparse furniture of the 17th century. The past was vivid there, for not an attribute was missing. There was a cavernous fireplace and a spinning wheel, at which a bent old woman in loose wrapper and deep poke bonnet sat back towards me, silently spinning despite the festive season. An infinite dampness seemed upon the place, and I marveled that no fire should be blazing. The high-backed settle faced the row of curtained windows on the left, and seemed to be occupied, though I was not sure. I did not like everything about what I saw, and felt again the fear I had. This fear grew stronger from what I had before it lessened, for the more I looked at the old man's bland face, the more its very blandness terrified me. The eyes never moved, and the skin was too like wax. Finally, I was sure it was not a face at all, but a fiendishly cunning mask. But the flabby hands, curiously gloved, wrote genially on the tablet and told me I must wait a while before I could be led to the place of festival. Pointing to a chair, table, and pile of books, the old man now left the room, and when I sat down to read, I saw that the books were hoary and mouldy, and that they include old Morrister's Wilde's Marvels of Science and terrible Sedicimus Triumphatus of Joseph Glanville, published in 1681, and shocking, Demolatria of Regimus, printed in 1595 at Lyons, and worst of all, the unmentionable Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, and Olius Warmian's forbidden Latin translation, a book which I had never seen, but of which I had heard monstrous things whispered. No one spoke to me, but I could hear the creaking of signs in the wind outside, and the whir of the wheel as the bonneted old woman continued her silent spinning. I thought the room and the books and the people very morbid and disquieting, but because an old tradition of my father's had summoned me to strange feastings, I resolved to expect queer things. So I tried to read, and soon became tremblingly absorbed by something I found in that accursed Necronomicon. A thought and a legend too hideous for my sanity or consciousness, but I disliked it when I fancied I heard the closing of one of the windows that the study faced, as if it had been stealthily opened. It had seemed to follow a whirring that was not of the old woman's spinning wheel. This was not much, though, for the old woman was spinning very hard, and the age clock had been striking. After that, I lost the feeling that there were persons on the settee, and was reading intently and shuddering when the old man came back, booted and dressed in a loose antique costume, and sat down on that very bench, so that I could not see him. It was certainly nervous waiting, and the blasphemous book in my hands made it doubly so. When 11 struck, however... Here. When 11 struck, however, the old man stood up, glided to a massive carved chest in a corner, got 2 hooded cloaks, one of which he donned and the other of which he draped around the old woman, who was ceasing her monotonous spinning. Then they both started for the outer door, the woman lamely creeping, and the old man, after picking up the very book I had been reading, beckoning me as he drew his hood over that unmoving face or mask. We went out into the moonless and tortuous network of that incredibly ancient town, went out as the lights in the curtained windows disappeared one by one, and the dog star leered at the throng of the cowled, cloaked figures that poured silently from every doorway and formed monstrous processions up this street and that, past the creaking signs and antediluvian gables, the thatched roof and diamond-painted windows, threading perceptual. Excuse me a moment. Sorry. Goodness gracious. Diamond-paned windows threading precipitous lanes where decaying houses overlapped and crumbled together, gliding across open courts and churchyards where the bobbing lanthorns made eldritch drunken constellations. Amid these hushed throngs, I followed my voiceless guides, jostled by elbows that seemed preternaturally soft, and pressed by chests and stomach that seemed abnormally pulpy, but never seeing a face and hearing never a word. Up, 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 the eerie columns slithered, and I saw that all the travelers were converging as they flowed near a sort of focus of crazy alleys at the top of a high hill in the center of the town, where perched a great white church. I had seen it from the road's crests when I looked at the King's Port in the new dusk, and it had made me shiver because Aldebaran had seemed to balance itself a moment on the ghostly spire. There was an open space around the church, partly a churchyard with spectral shafts, and partly a half-paved square, swept newly bare of snow by the wind, and lined unwholesomely archaic houses, having peaked roofs and overhanging gables. Death fires danced over the tombs, revealing gruesome vistas, though queerly failing to cast any shadow. Past the churchyard, there were no houses, and I could see over the hill summit watch the glimmering stars on the harbor, although the town was invisible in the dark. Only once, while a lanthorn bobbed horribly through a serpentine alley on its way to overtake the throng that was now slipping speechlessly into the church. I watched till the crowd had oozed into the black doorway, till all the stragglers had followed, and the old man was pulling at my sleeve. But I was determined to be the last. Then I finally went, the sinister man and the old spinning woman before me. Crossing the threshold into that swarming temple of unknown darkness, I turned once to look at the outside world at the churchyard phosphorescence, as the churchyard phosphorescence cast a sickly glow on the hilltop pavement, and as I did so, I shuddered. For though the wind had not left much snow, a few patches did remain on the path near the door, and in that fleeting backward look it seemed to my troubled eye that they bore no mark of passing feet, not even mine. The church was scarcely lighted by all the lanthorns that had entered it, for most of the throng had already vanished. They had streamed up the aisle between the high white pews to the trap door of the vaults, which yawned loathsomely open just before the pulpit, and were now squirming noiselessly in. I followed dumbly down the foot-worn steps into the dark, suffocating crypt. The tale of that sinuous line of night marchers seemed very horrible, and I saw them wriggling into a venerable tomb. And as I saw them wiggling into a venerable tomb, they seemed more horrible still. Then I noticed that the tomb's floor had an aperture down which the throng was sliding, and in a moment we were all descending an ominous staircase of rough-hewn stone. A narrow spiral staircase, damp and particularly odorous, that wound endlessly down into the bowels of the hill, past monotonous walls of dripping stone blocks and crumbling mortar. It was still silent. It was a silent, shocking descent, and I observed, after a horrible interval, that the walls and steps were changing in nature, as if chiseled out of solid rock. What mainly troubled me was the myriad footfalls made no sound and set up no echoes. After more aeons of descent, I saw some side passages or burrows leading from unknown recesses of blackness to this shaft of nighted mystery. Soon they became excessively numerous, like impious catacombs of nameless menace, and their pungent odor of decay grew quite unbearable. I knew we must have passed through the mountain and beneath the earth of Kingsport itself, and I shivered that a town would be so aged and maggoty with subterraneous evil. Then I saw the lurid shimmering of pale light and heard the insidious lapping of sunless waters. Again I shivered, for I did not like the things that the night had brought, and wished bitterly that no forefather had summoned me to this primal rite. As the steps and passages grew broader, I heard another sound, the thin, whining mockery of a feeble flute. And suddenly there spread out before me the boundless vistas of an inner world, a vast fungus shore litten by belching column of greenish flame, and washed by a wide, oily river that flowed from the abysses frightful and unsuspected to join the blackest gulfs of immemorial ocean. Fainting and gasping, I looked at that unhallowed Erebus of tightened toadstools, leprous fire in slimy water, and saw the cloaked throng forming a semicircle around the blazing pillar. It was the Yule rite, older than man and fated to survive him, the primal rite of the solstice and of spring's promise beyond the snows, the rite of fire and evergreen, light and music. In the Stygian grotto, I saw them do the rite, and adore the sick pillar of flame, and throw into the water handfuls gouged out of the viscous vegetation which glittered green in the chlorotic glare. I saw this and saw something amphirously squatted far away from the light, piping noisomely on a flute, and as the thing piped, I thought I heard a noxious, muffled fluttering in the fetid darkness, where I could not see it. But what frightened me most was that flaming column, spouting volcanically from depths profound and unconceivable, casting no shadow as healthy flame should, and coating the nitrous stone above with a nasty, venomous verdigris. For in that seething combustion no warmth lay, but only the clamminess of death and corruption. The man who had brought me now squirmed to a point directly beside the hideous flame, and made stiff ceremonial motions to the semicircle he faced. At certain stages of the ritual, they did groveling obeisance, especially when he held above his head the abhorrent Necronomicon which he had taken with him. And I shared all the obeisances because I had been summoned to this festival by the writing of my forefathers. The old man made a signal to the half-seen flute player in the darkness, which the player thereupon changed its feeble drone to a scarce louder drone in another key, precipitating as it did so a horror unthinkable and unexpected. At this horror, I sank nearly to the lichened earth, transfixed with a dread not of this nor any world, but only of the mad spaces between the stars. Out of the unimaginable blackness beyond the gangrenous glare of that cold flame, out of the Tartarian leagues through which that oily river rolled uncanny, unheard, and unsuspected, there flopped rhythmically a horde of tamed, trained, hybrid winged things that no sound eye could ever wholly grasp, or sound brain ever wholly remember. There were not altogether crows, nor moles, nor buzzards, nor ants, nor vampire bats, nor decomposed human beings, but something I cannot and must not recall. They flopped limply along, half with their webbed feet, half with their membranous wings, as they reached the throng of celebrants. The cowled figures seized and mounted them, and rode off one by one along the reaches of that unlighted river, into the pits and galleries of panic, where poisonous springs feed frightful and undiscoverable cataracts. The old spinning woman had gone with the throng, and the man remained only because I had refused when he motioned me to seize an animal and ride like the rest. When I staggered to my feet, that the amorphous flute player had rolled out of sight, but two of the beasts were patiently standing by. As I hung back, the old man produced his stylus and tablet and wrote that he was the true deputy of my father who had founded the Yule worship in this ancient place, and that it had been decreed I should come back, and that the most secret mysteries were yet to be performed. He wrote this in a very ancient hand, and when I still hesitated, he pulled from his loose robe a seal ring and watch, both with my family arms, to prove he was what he said. But it was a hideous proof, because I knew from old papers that watch had been buried with my great-great-great-great-grandfather in 1698. Presently, the old man drew back from his hood and pointed to the family resemblance in his face, but I only shuddered because I was sure the face was nearly a devilish waxen mask. The flopping animals were now scratching restlessly at the lichen, and I saw that the old man was nearly as restless himself. When one of the things began to waddle and edge away, he quickly turned to stop it, so that the suddenness of his motion dislodged the waxen mask from what should have been his head. And then, because that nightmare's position barred me from the stone staircase down which we had come, I flung myself into the oily underground river that bubbled somewhere to the caves of the sea, flung myself into that putrescent juice of earth's inner horrors before the madness of my screams could bring down upon me all the charnel legions these pest gulfs might conceal. At the hospital, they told me I'd been found half frozen in Kingsport Harbor at dawn, clinging to the drifting spar that accident had sent to save me. They told me I had taken the wrong fork of the hill road at night before and fallen over the cliffs at Orange Point, a thing they deduced from footprints in the snow. There was nothing I could say because everything was wrong. Everything was wrong with the broad windows showing a sea of roofs, in which only 1 in 5 was ancient, and the sound of trolleys and motors in the streets below. They insisted that this was Kingsport, and I could not deny it. When I went delirious at hearing the hospital stood near the old churchyard on Capitol Hill, they sent me to St. Mary's in Arkham, where I could have better care. I liked it there, for the doctors were broad-minded and even lent me their influence in obtaining the carefully sheltered copy of Al-Hazred's Objectional Necronomicon from the library of Miskatonic University. They said something about a psychosis, and I agreed I had better get any harassing obsession off my mind. So I read again that hideous chapter and shuddered doubly because it was indeed not new to me. I had seen it before. Let footprints tell what they might. and where it was I had seen it were best forgotten. There was no one in waking hours who could remind me of it, but my dreams are filled with terror because of phrases I dare not quote. I dare quote only one paragraph, put into such English that I can make from the awkward low Latin. The nethermost caverns, wrote the mad Arab, are not for the fathoming of eyes that see, for their marvels are strange and terrific. Curse the ground where dead thoughts live new and audibly bodied, and evil the mind that is held by no head. Wisely did Ibn Shakabo say that happy is the tomb where no wizard hath lain, and happy the town at night whose wizards are all ashes. For it is of old rumor that the soul of the devil bought hastes not from this charnel clay, but fats and instructs the very worm that gnaws, till out of the corruption horrid life springs, and dull scavengers of earth wax crafty to vex and swell, monstrous to plague it. Great holes are secretly digged where earth's pores ought to suffice, and things have learned to walk that ought to crawl. And that is the end of the festival. Next week, we will read The Call of Cthulhu. And I'm going to go rest my voice because I nearly lost it there in the middle. So, not sure who all's still here. But thanks for sitting here. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for listening. Hey, Savage Dad. Yep, I'm off to get some rest. Oof. We're going to test this real quick to see how this works. One moment. Because, like I said, we're trying to play with some new things. Oh, cool. That works. Nice. Just a couple other things I got to figure out then. But not bad at all. Oh, gosh. Y'all have a good night. Again, thanks for sticking around. Sweet dreams, and I'll catch you tomorrow night for some Baldur's Gate. See you later.